I just got a kitten and she's having a bit of a mad half hour. So if you hear scampering, that's what it is. Hello, hello babe, do you want to say hello? I need to start for you there. Here she is. Her name is Winnie. She's very small and cute, but she does like to bite my nose. And she really wants to leave, so I'm gonna let go. As I can't read all of these usernames. Tracy's Mitnowl XV7TE said that they love Japanese fiction writers. The quietness and depth of the stories are often captured in tiny books, and would like recommendations based on that. I've read some Japanese fiction. Actually this year I read The Makioka Sisters with Matthew Sharapa, which is not tiny and small, so I guess that's not what you're looking for. We do have Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto. This is 2 short stories that are contained together. They have similar themes of grief and food and quiet friendships. It is quite lovely and charming, and a little bit a kind of slightly magical feeling, but in a very low-key way. A book that definitely cannot be described as lovely is The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Yukio Mishima, but it is one of my favourites. This is about a band of 13-year-old boys in Japan in the 1950s who become obsessed with the sailor, and then when they feel like he's betrayed them, things go dark from there. Definitely a much darker book than Kitchen, but I think an equally wonderful read. Get off the tree. Catherine D.V. asked for a book with similar themes and writing as Fernando Tries's work. I've only read one book by Fernando Trieste, which was Pink Slime, which is a very low-key dystopia. I'm not normally a dystopia fan. She is a Uruguayan writer, and it is kind of quiet but also creepy at the same time, and it is very insular and focused on one person. And another Uruguayan writer that I've read that I liked was Mario Benedetti, who wrote Springtime in a Broken Mirror. It is different in that it is about the dictatorship in Uruguay in the 1960s and 70s, and the father of this family has had to move away from his wife and daughter, and they're not sure what's happened to him, and we see things from both of their perspectives, and it is really beautifully written and very slow and quiet in a similar way to Fernando Trieste, and it does also have that feeling of something ominous that isn't completely clearly on the page. And then a non-fiction I think you would like if you enjoyed Fernando Trieste is Islands of Abandonment by Cal Flynn, which is about areas in the world where people have retreated and the way that nature restores or changes those places after people have gone. So she looks at the DMZ and Cyprus, places like where there's been slag heaps from energy waste, and the ways that those things have regenerated, and it is a really interesting, really beautifully written, slow, quiet book, and it has the themes that are present in Pink Slime of like nature and decline and humans' impact on the world. I told you not to eat that bloody tree. So SC8717 said, I would love if you could recommend something that's historical, literary, that feels very atmospheric or romantic. I'm thinking of the painting Supper at the Ball by Adolf von Menzel, or other kinds of paintings like it as the vibe inspiration. I keep thinking of the atmosphere of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I've never read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, though I might be next year. But I've looked at these paintings. What you're looking for is kind of a romantic, light, maybe there's something going on under the surface, but it is much more like big parties and things. The paintings most reminded me of were not actually historical fiction, but classics, because obviously similarly set in the time period. So Vanity Fair and War and Peace were both what was brought to mind for me there, but I'm not sure you're looking for like 1,000-page books set in the Napoleonic Wars or in Victorian London about high society and war and peace. I'm not sure that's what you were looking for, although Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is also 1,000 pages long, so I think either of those, they could work. They definitely have elements of that romantic vibe, as well as more satire and social commentary in Vanity Fair, and a look at war and loss and familial relationships in War and Peace. The one that is historical fiction that kind of has that vibe is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gower. It is set in the 18th century, and it is about a courtesan who is down on her luck because her sugar daddy has died and has to go back to the brothel where she was working beforehand, and a merchant who the captain of his ship has brought back a curiosity, a mermaid, the skeleton of a mermaid, and he ends up selling it to the brothel madam, and that's how they become entangled. And it has really wonderful atmospheric writing about the 18th century, and also some of those darker elements of the 18th century as well, including a look at slavery and sex work and gender and race in London at the time. Tabitha Hempshall 3853 what said, I want a book to help navigate the situation where you're struggling to work out if a romantic relationship you're in is right for you. Ideally a protagonist who is technically happy but conflicted. This one was difficult for me. It's not something that I read a lot of because I don't read that much like contemporary fiction. And when I do, people tend not to be particularly happy. Okay, what actually came to mind was Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason, which has some of those themes, although our main character is definitely not happy. Our main character is struggling with a mental health condition, and it is very much about her mental health and the effect that that has on her relationships. And she is in a relationship that is that technically happy relationship, technically the perfect relationship, what she wanted, but she is struggling to stay in it due to the issues around her mental health and also familial relationships, particularly a fraught mother-daughter relationship. So I think that it does cover some of those themes, it does work. But it is not a happy person, although the relationship is technically content. And the other one I thought of, again, has a lot more going on than this, but Trespasses by Louise Kennedy is about a woman in her 20s who is having an affair with a much older man. He's in his 40s, I believe. But the other conflict issue is that she is Catholic and he is Protestant in the 1970s just outside of Belfast. And so it has the troubles are going on. She's a teacher in a school and we see how the troubles affect her children, the children in her class. She also works in a pub that is Catholic owned but majority Protestant frequented, and so the issues of the troubles come out a lot. It's a really tender, heartwarming, lovely book. Heartwarming is the wrong word. It's a really tender, beautiful, emotional book that I think does a really good job at looking at that time in history, but it does have that conflict of the relationship in the centre, and also the conflict of the two different cultures and the ways that they view one another. Milena from Milena Reads asked for historical fiction with beautiful writing, which is of course my wheelhouse, and obviously Hilary Mantel, always and forever Hilary Mantel. But I think, Milena, you've read Wolf Hall? Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, you need to read Wolf Hall. But I think you have. Hilary Mantel, always and forever, will be the queen of beautifully written historical fiction. But as well as that, if you haven't read The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje, that has some of the most stunning writing I've read. Although I did read it when I was 17, which is now 14 years ago. So I should maybe give it another go before I'm recommending it so wholeheartedly. But I absolutely loved it. It is a World War II historical fiction, which normally is not my vibe at all. If you have watched my video about All the Light You Cannot See, you will know that that is not my jam, generally speaking. But I really love this one. It is set in a villa in Italy as the Axis forces are retreating and the Allied forces are coming up Italy, and we have a Canadian nurse who is looking after this man who has been burnt almost to death, and there is a Canadian thief there and an Indian sapper who is trying to decommission the bomb that is in the garden, and it is really wonderful. And we also flash back to this burnt man's past and how he came to be burnt and in a villa in Italy. And yeah, as I said, absolutely stunning writing, really stunning and moving. A bit creepy and weird and dark in some aspects of it, but I really enjoyed it. And then the other one is Till by Daniel Kelman, which is definitely creepy and dark. This one won the International Booker a couple of years ago, and it is set during the 30 Years' War in Europe in the 17th century. And it follows Till, who is a trickster character from German folklore, but he's been transplanted into the body of this boy. And we see the witch trials and the famine and also the war, and Till jumps about in time to the various points when he has been involved with the Winter King's court and is working as a jester, and also in the woods. It has a very much fairy tale quality, but it is very dark, and I think it's absolutely wonderfully written, really engrossing and engaging and beautiful in a really kind of creepy dark way that I love in historical fiction. Thaying Yang 13 asked for a book giving big Swiss vibes, a book of strong, maybe even sinister female friendships. I have read Big Swiss, but I didn't love it. But it's kind of funny, wry sense of humour, and yeah, definitely mentally ill characters and difficult relationships. I guess the one that's the most similar that I can think of is Bunny by Mona Awad, and I also don't like Mona Awad, but if you like Big Sis, I think you would like Bunny. It is about a girl who becomes obsessed with these 4 other girls at her university writing course, and these 4 girls, they all call each other Bunny, and she ends up being invited to their house. Mona Awad writes in a very literal way, a very straightforward literal way with a lot of heavy description, so it does feel a little YA in terms of her writing style, but I think that it definitely has those sinister female friendships and a strangeness of not really knowing what's going on. It goes to places that other people found weird, I found a bit dull, but again, I didn't like Big Sis, so you might like Bunny if you like that one. One that I did like, and it's not friendship, but it is female relationships, is Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi, which is about a woman who is looking after her mother who has dementia, and they have a very difficult relationship because of neglect and abuse in the past, and so it's about how do you come to terms with looking after someone who needs your help, and what are familial expectations and obligations when there is that trauma from the past. And it also deals with memory and suppression and what is real as well, and it is a really well written, kind of stark, cold book, but I really enjoyed it. And then one that's non-fiction that I've read recently is Doppelganger by Naomi Klein, which does have elements of a strange female relationship, even though it is kind of a parasocial relationship between Naomi Klein and Naomi Wolf, and it is about Naomi Klein's being mistaken for Naomi Wolf a lot online, because they were both female writers who wrote about topics like kind of social justice-y topics. Naomi Wolf wrote like Vagina and The Beauty Myth about feminism, and Naomi Klein wrote No Logo and Shock Doctrine and This Changes Everything about capitalism and the climate. She's more of a leftist, whereas Naomi Wolf is more of a liberal, or at least was. And this is about how Naomi Wolf became dragged into like conspiracy theories and anti-vax stuff, and how that has affected Naomi Klein because they were being confused all the time. And she writes about the mirror world and how there are these two different parts of the world with radically different opposing views. It was really interesting. Naomi Klein is a great writer, and it is interesting to read kind of a strange female friendship story about doppelgangers that is non-fiction. Solid Snake, or 1806, said something that will make me feel like I'm sitting outside on a warm summer night smelling concrete in the air. So that's hot town summer in the city kind of a feeling, I'm assuming. Now, one that gives me this feeling, that I'm not actually entirely sure is set in the summer, but it definitely has that vibe. Love in the Big City by Sang-Yong Park. This is set in Seoul, South Korea, and it is about a gay writer and his best friend, his female best friend, and they're what they get up to, their relationships with other people, with one another, with their family, and his writing and becoming a writer. It is kind of trashy, but in a really fun way, and it is, yeah, and what it's like to be gay in a conservative society, to be a woman who doesn't want to fit into the things imposed upon one, set in his university times and then also in his late 20s, and it has that hot summer in the city kind of a vibe. And then another one that I would say feels similarly is Keeping the House by Tichi Chin, which is set in London in the 90s and 2000s, and it is about a woman whose partner has gone to jail, but he has some heroin that is in Turkey that needs to be smuggled into the UK, and she kind of takes over that, and also their daughter, and her experience growing up in this Turkish Cypriot community in North London. And it's a dark book, it's a strange book, it's really interestingly written, but it definitely has those summer in the city vibes, although again, I'm not sure it's entirely set in the summer. And then one that is non-fiction, again, that I think has a similar vibe is Stay True by Hua Su. This is a memoir about his experience growing up as Asian Americans, Taiwanese Americans specifically, in California, and going to Berkeley and meeting other Asian Americans, and his best friend in particular, who is a Japanese American boy, and their relationship with one another, their friendship, being these kind of insufferable, pretentious teenagers at university. But on top of that, it has really, I don't want to spoil it because there is something that happens in the middle that changes the tone of the book, but there is a lot of like driving around, listening to music in the 80s, 90s in California. So I definitely think it has those vibes, as well as something more to it. Catch It All Over asked for adventure fiction about female scientists explorers. Now again, adventure fiction is not something I read a lot of, so I'm not sure that I have like great recommendations for this. I do have some. One is fantasy, and that is The Philosopher's Flight by Tom Miller. This is set in the kind of around the First World War in an alternative universe where there is witchcraft, but witchcraft is quite scientific in this alternative universe, although people fly and like cast spells. And it is about this boy who is it's about this man who is one of the only male witches male flyers, and he tries to get into this university to be, which is like the best course for flyers, and he wants to get involved in the First World War, like airlifting people out to safety, which is what these flyers do. And all of the other people on his course are women, and they really like roast him and make things difficult for him, and they are doing like adventurous things. They are flying and airlifting, and there is also this group of men who want to put women back in the kitchen and ban witchcraft. And it sounds silly, but I actually really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the writing. It has a great vibe. It's a really fun adventure-y book. And although they are witches, not actual scientists, as I said, the witchcraft is quite sciencey, so if you're up for that, that could work. The only other one I could think of about a female scientist that I've read is A Week to be Wicked by Desert, which is romance. It is probably my favourite romance book that I've read, which I don't love romance, generally speaking, so that might be damning with faint praise, but I enjoyed it. It is about a woman who's kind of based on Mary Anning. So they're in Dorset, and she discovers this fossil, and she is a geologist, and she kind of basically forces this man to elope with her so she can get to Edinburgh and go to the geology symposium and present her findings. So it is about a female scientist, and there is an adventure trying to get from Dorset to Edinburgh, which is like 800 miles. But obviously in the 18th century it takes quite a long time to cover 800 miles. And yeah, the shenanigans that they get up to on the way. The British Bookworm asked for a long, sprawling family saga that will teach me some history. Now, you may know that I'm not a huge fan of sprawling family sagas, generally speaking, but I have read several of them. There are two that I can think of that I actually like. The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, and I think the reason I like this one is that we have 4 daughters and their father and their mother in Congo, in the 1950s, and they are missionaries. The reason I like it is because we just follow these 6 characters, like it doesn't change, but we see them they're trying to convert this village to be Christian, and we see the kind of the dangers and the colonialist mindset of missionaries and missionaryism in general, and the dangers of that. But also they're in Congo in a very interesting time, so we see the rise of Patrice Lumumba, and also the CIA involvement in Congo, and diamond smuggling, and there's all sorts going on. And Kingsolver is a really brilliant writer. I absolutely love her style. It goes through different perspectives of the different daughters, and I think the mother as well. And it's really wonderfully written, really interesting time period in history as well to read about. And then the other one is The Old Drift by Namwali Sapel, and this one does like span a lot of time, from 1901 to like 1920, from like 1901 to 2024. Like this was written in 2019 as well, so it does go into the future, into an imagined future, and it is set in Zambia, and it begins at the Old Drift, which is this bar on the Zambezi River. I think it's Zambezi, and there are 3 men there, and an incident happens between them, and then they kind of spiral off, and we follow their descendants in England, in Italy, and in Zambia, and the ways they come back again and get reconnected. And the whole thing is narrated by a swarm of mosquitoes, and it is really brilliantly written. If you're a fan of Zadie Smith, I think you would like it. There's a lot of like conversations between people that are discussing ideas of colonialism and revolution and communism and the future, techno colonialism, and the relationship of pharmacological, like big pharma, and Africa, particularly during the AIDS crisis, and on into the future. And it is a really brilliantly written, like funny, wonderful saga that has a touch element of magical realism and sci-fi as well. But I don't generally read sci-fi, and I really enjoyed this book. Then Coxie Hannah's asked for something light and easy that doesn't require too many brain cells. And when I want something light and easy, I normally go for middle grade. I haven't read a huge amount of it, to be perfectly fair. I tend to reread the ones I like. But the ones that I would recommend is the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend. It is about a girl called Morrigan Crow who is believed to be a cursed child, doomed to die on her 11th birthday. She lives in this town where everyone thinks that because she's cursed, she's like cursing them. But then on her 11th birthday, she gets whisked away to the magical city of Nevermore, which nobody else knew about, and is put forward to get into this wondrous society, which is a place for people with knacks, which is special talents and gifts. But the only problem is she doesn't have a knack, so she doesn't know how she's going to get in. And if she doesn't get in, she'll be sent back to where she was before. and it is so much fun, so much whimsy. It is really well written, well executed. The plots are engaging and not too simplistic, but at the same time very easy to follow, and it has the kind of wondrous magic of being immersed in a world that you haven't been in before. And then the other one is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This is a children's classic, and I really enjoyed it so much. It is about Sophie Hatter, who is a young woman who thinks that she will never amount to much because she is the eldest, and everybody knows that it is the youngest who goes out to make their fortune. But one day she is cursed to be an old woman, and so she decides that she's going to go out and make her fortune anyway, because nothing else bad can happen to her. And she ends up in the house of Wizard Howl, who is supposed to be this very evil wizard who eats girls' hearts. It has a lot of like fairy tale tropes and things, but done in a really interesting way. I really enjoyed it. It's not like a straightforward simplistic feminist retelling, but it is very engaging, very funny, very Welsh, and I really enjoyed it. Happy Knitter 2020 said an adult dark academia fantasy, which is an interesting request to ask of me because I don't really read fantasy, and I don't like dark academia means nothing to me. I understand what it is. I mean, it's not something that I'm particularly drawn to. Like if you want those recommendations, I would recommend the book Leo. She reads a lot of that dark academia stuff. That's her whole vibe. Whereas it's not really my vibe, or something I've read a huge amount of. I read The Betrayals. I think it was called The Betrayals. The Betrayals by Bridget Collins, which is set again around the Second World War in this school. Well, there's 2 time periods, and it's set in a school in Europe in the mountains, where they play this game, and the game is the thing, and everyone's obsessed with this game, and they learn like various different arts and sciences and things to try and be the best at this game, and we have these 2 boys who are obsessed with it and are rivals, and then we have it set in the future where there is rising fascism in Europe, and there is a woman who is working at this school for the first time because they never let women in before, and they never let women play this game. But now they have a woman who is teaching there, and one of the boys from the earlier time period comes back for something to do with this fascist party. And there were things about this book that I didn't really love, but it's the only really dark academia fantasy that I can think of that I've read. And then Matthew Sharappa, who I mentioned earlier, asked for a book that feels enchanting or magical without enchantments or magic. So he sent me quite a task there. I guess it kind of depends what kind of feeling of enchantment or magic you're going for, because the one that first came to my mind was Hilary Mantel, as I mentioned earlier, The Giant O'Brien, that is based on the true story of this man who was very tall, from Ireland, and he came to England to make his fortune, and a Scottish surgeon decided he really wanted this body because he was obsessed with collecting bodies that were oddities, and so he tries to take this man's body when he dies, and it is about like colonialism and the claiming of the colonized person's body, and the like taking of indigenous peoples, Ireland during colonization. And it has a lot set in Ireland as this giant, because in Ireland all the giants are storytellers, and so he is telling stories at the beginning, and him and his band of various of like rural Irish folk coming to London and their experience of the big city. But I would say it's magical and enchantments in the feeling of like fairies, as in the traditional idea of fairies, as in like stick a knife in your kidneys because you've stolen their gold fairies, change your children out fairies. Like it's dark, but obviously because it's dealing with colonialism, and it's also telling those stories. They're the stories of the fairies, but we know that they are stories. And yeah, it's a lot about storytelling, and also we have the kind of evil, twisted, dark man who's coming for our hero, who is a giant. Like there are magical elements to it, but it is all based entirely in fact, and there is no actual magic except that stories are magic, I guess. And then other ones I think of, A General Theory of Oblivion by Jose Eduardo Aguilusa, which is a piece of Angolan fiction set during the Angolan fight for independence, and it is about a woman who she's Portuguese, and her husband, her sister and her sister and her sister's husband flee Angola at the beginning of the outbreak of violence, and they take with them diamonds, and so people are after these diamonds, but our main character walls herself into her apartment and doesn't leave for 30 years, 40 years, and we follow her like inside this walled in space, and then also what is going on, and it's about like the absurdity of violence and colonialism again. And it is, yeah, a very strange book with weird things that happen, and I definitely felt like it has a feeling of magic. I'm not sure either of those are particularly enchanting. I would say maybe The Giant O'Brien is more enchanting, but there's definitely a feeling of something magical happening in both of them. I would also say, actually, Summer Light and Then Comes the Night by Jon Kalman Stephenson, which is a kind of a series of interconnected short stories about a rural community in Iceland. It is translated from Icelandic, and it follows a whole year, so it starts off in the Arctic summer and then into Arctic winter and back out again, and these characters are very strange, and it's all about like small towns watching one another, the judgment of small towns, but there are like people, there is a man who has put holes in his roof in the exact position of the constellations above him, so it definitely has enchanting vibes, and I really, really enjoyed it. It is strange and charming, similar to Helen Oyeyemi, I would say, although less explicitly magical. So that is all of the requests that I got in for book recommendations. I hope that some of these are good recommendations for you. If you do read them, let me know in the comments down below. And if you didn't get a chance to ask for a recommendation, ask me in the comments down below and I will give you my recommendations there as well. Or if you would like another video like this, let me know as well. If I get enough recommendations in the comments, then I will do another one, a second part later on. But thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and to subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye!